G'day, Justin Hawke from Right Source here in the great outdoors, talking governance, not-for-profit, talking a little bit about accounting concepts that comes up a lot at board meetings and with not-for-profits, which I don't think necessarily people fully understand. Right of use assets. We'll go into an explanation of how these work and what it means to try and, because it's important as a board to understand financials, to understand what they're trying to tell you. We're not going to go into the accounting technical side of it. It's more about trying to explain what this should be telling you. So to kick off, and probably to just, I suppose, before we get into the right of use assets in detail, two concepts that I think are really important before you get into this conversation. The first one is, in terms of accounting, it's important, and I've said this in some other videos, accounting isn't real. Now what I mean by that is it's not something you can touch. It's not something that's carved in stone. Accounting is a concept. Same as the English language is a concept. And it's really about, same as the language, accounting is a language. It's just done with numbers rather than words. And what accounting is trying to do as a language is convey a story. So it's trying to convey meaning. That's all it's trying to do. So when you're trying to look at something like right of use assets, it's not necessarily working out how technically it's done, but trying to work out what story is this trying to convey to me when I'm looking at these numbers. What is the meaning behind it? The second part of that then is, in terms of accounting and an accounting term, understanding what depreciation represents. And depreciation, amortization, they're sort of the same thing. And understanding what that, because it's again, it's not real. You can't see depreciation. It's imaginary. So what is it trying to convey to you? So depreciation in itself is basically using up the value of an asset. So let's not just stop there, let's go back a little bit. So when you buy an asset, so like a motor vehicle, you buy a motor vehicle and it costs you whatever it costs. As you use that motor vehicle, so you drive it from A to B, C, D, like you drive it around, you're gaining value from using that asset. So you're using the value up that you've purchased, because as you drive it, it's getting older. So it's getting lower in value. And that's where the term depreciating comes from, is that the value is being used up and you're using that value to get from A to B. There's value in that. So depreciation represents the value you have used of an asset. That's what it's meant to represent. Lots of different ways you can calculate it, but in terms of what it's trying to convey to you, it's trying to convey the value of assets you've used up. So let's get into a reasonably heavy topic of right of use assets. What is right of use assets trying to do? What right of use assets does is, where you're renting an asset or you've got a lease on an asset, it is trying to say, well, instead of if you've rented it, what if you own that asset? My reaction when I first bought it, we were renting it, and that's why we rented it, because we didn't want to buy it. So rather than thinking of it as buying the asset, if say you sign up for a rental for a 5-year lease on an office and it's costing you $10,000 a month, so you're going to pay, over that 5-year term, you're going to pay $600,000 in rent. What right of use assets go, well, actually, you've got an asset, not in that you've bought the building, but you've got an office that you're able to use. You've got the right to use that office for 5 years because you're paying rent. So what if you paid all of that rent up front, or you recognize all that rent up front? So you got $600,000 as an asset, which represents the right to use that office for 5 years. That's the first thing it does. So you got the asset. So for me, it's sort of similar to buying it. If you were to pay that $600,000 up front as an asset, you'd also need to get a loan to be able to pay that money. So this is where it then says, well, if you're recognizing an asset of $600,000 for the rent, for the ability to rent the space for 5 years, you'd also need a loan at the same time, which would be about the same value, which makes sense. So that's sort of where you get to. Now, if it was to stop there and you have an asset for $600,000 that you depreciate over the time you use it, which would be about $10,000 a month, it would equate to what you would have paid in rent. So it sort of makes sense. The payment that you'd make to rent would go to paying off the loan that you had. So it all would equal about the same amount, but that's not what we see. When you get right of use assets, it's a different figure to the rent amount. And I think this then adds to the confusion of what is it trying to tell me. So what have we got? Let's to come back. So we've got an asset that we've recognized for the 5 years that we've got the ability to use this office. And then we've got a loan for the same amount or similar amount, which would be the amount that you would have had to take out to borrow to pay that $600,000. Now, when you have a loan, you would pay interest on a loan. So that's what we assume, is that there's an interest rate that you pay, and there's a way to work that out. We're not going to go into that now, but let's say there's an interest rate. Now, whenever you get a loan and there's interest to pay on that loan, because the balance is higher at the start, you pay more interest at the start. And then as the loan gets lower, you pay less interest. So from an accounting standpoint then, what you see with right-of-use assets is larger interest getting charged through to the P&L, to the profit and loss at early stages, and less at the end. So when you compare the effect of renting on your profit and loss to right-of-use assets cost more at the start and then less at the end because the interest rate goes down. The use of the asset stays the same over the whole time and stays very comparable to rent, but it's the interest that causes the difference. So that's what right-of-use assets is, and there's nothing more than that. All it's trying to convey is that the business does have an asset in that it has a right to use something, and it's trying to value that asset and show it on the balance sheet, because that's an asset that you've got that's valuable to the business. Also to show the loan in terms of the obligation that you've got and you've locked yourself into for that period as well. Is it right or wrong? Look, this is why I suppose a lot of boards will not have right-of-use assets in their management accounts. They'll just do rent because it makes more sense to them. And I think this is important as well in terms of accounting being a language and conveying meaning. It's about using it in a way that conveys meaning. So if you want to use right-of-use assets in your management reports, that's fine. Make sure you budget for it as well, so it's telling the same story. If you don't, that's fine as well. You can just do it in your financial statements at end of year and have an explanation as to the adjustment. Either way is fine because it's up to what it means most to you. So that's right-of-use assets. I wouldn't blame you if you want to watch that a couple of times to get through it, but that's what it is. If you've got any other questions or want some more information on this, feel free to chuck a comment down below. Otherwise, we've got lots of other videos on YouTube on accounting, not-for-profit and governance, so feel free to have a look at those. Otherwise, thanks for your time today. Thanks for watching. It's been Justin Hogg from RightSource.